The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Buckingham Palace, as Sergeant Michael Thompson adjusted his red tunic one final time. 28 years old and standing at attention for the third year running, he had perfected the art of remaining perfectly still while tourists snapped photos and children pointed in wonder. His black bearskin hat sat firmly on his head, weighing nearly 2 pounds and made from the fur of a Canadian black bear. His polished boots reflected the early light like mirrors. It's the result of hours of meticulous preparation that began before dawn. The leather chin strap of his bearskin felt familiar against his jaw, a constant reminder of the weight of tradition he carried. His red tunic, adorned with intricate gold braiding and brass buttons that gleamed in the morning light, had been pressed to perfection. The white belt around his waist was spotless, and his rifle stood at exactly the prescribed angle beside him. Every detail of his appearance had been inspected multiple times before he took his position, because representing the crown meant accepting nothing less than absolute perfection. Michael had always dreamed of this position. Growing up in a small village outside London called Little Bramford, he would watch the changing of the guard on television with his grandfather, Harold, a former soldier who had served in the Royal Artillery during World War II. Harold would sit in his favorite armchair, pointing at the screen with his gnarled finger, explaining the significance of each movement, each tradition. "Look at that discipline, Michael," he would say, his eyes twinkling with pride. "That's what real soldiers look like. Every step means something. Every moment of stillness speaks louder than words. The precision, the discipline, the honor, it all spoke to something deep within Michael's young heart." His grandfather would tell him stories of military service, of the brotherhood among soldiers, and of the pride that came from serving something greater than oneself. When Harold passed away when Michael was 16, he left behind a collection of military medals and a handwritten note that simply read, "For Michael, may you find your own way to serve with honor." After years of rigorous training that pushed his physical and mental limits to their breaking point, and service in various regiments that took him from the training grounds of Catterick to deployments overseas, he had finally earned his place among the Queen's Guard. The selection process had been brutal, testing not just his military skills but his psychological resilience, his ability to remain motionless for hours, and his capacity to represent the very best of British military tradition. The journey to this moment had included months of specialized training at Wellington Barracks. He had learned the precise steps of ceremonial drill, practiced standing motionless for increasingly longer periods, and studied the intricate history and protocols that governed every aspect of his duties. He had memorized the exact positions for his hands, the proper angle for his rifle, and the acceptable responses to various situations he might encounter while on duty. Today felt different somehow, though Michael couldn't quite put his finger on why. The usual crowd of tourists was gathering in the forecourt, but there was an unusual energy in the air that seemed to crackle with anticipation. Street performers had set up nearby, their music drifting across the courtyard in a mixture of folk songs and modern melodies. A violin player was performing classical pieces near the Victoria Memorial, while a small group of musicians played traditional British folk tunes closer to the palace gates. Families with children were arriving earlier than usual, cameras ready to capture the spectacle that drew millions of visitors to London each year. Michael could hear multiple languages being spoken around him. French families discussing the architecture, German tourists reading from guidebooks, Spanish teenagers taking selfies, and what sounded like Japanese visitors excitedly pointing. At various aspects of the palace facade, the morning air carried the scent of London, a mixture of exhaust fumes, coffee from nearby cafes, the perfume of early flowers in St. James's Park, and that indefinable smell of a great city waking up to another day. Double-decker buses rumbled past on the nearby roads, engines providing a constant background hum that had become as familiar to Michael as his own heartbeat, as he stood motionless at his post. Michael's trained eyes scanned the crowd, without moving his head even a fraction of an inch. Years of experience had taught him to be aware of everything happening around him while maintaining his stoic composure. His peripheral vision had been honed through countless hours of practice, allowing him to observe a wide field of view. While appearing to stare straight ahead into the distance, he noticed the usual array of tourists. Elderly couples taking photographs, young backpackers consulting maps, families with strollers navigating the crowds, and tour groups following guides, who held up colorful umbrellas or small flags. But then his attention was caught by a particular family approaching with what appeared to be a large dog on a leash. The animal was magnificent, a German shepherd with a thick, lustrous coat that gleamed in the morning sunlight. His fur was primarily black and tan, with distinctive markings that spoke of careful breeding and excellent care. The dog stood nearly 2 feet tall at the shoulder and moved with the confident gait of a well-trained animal. Its alert ears twitched at every sound, from the distant rumble of traffic to the nearby chatter of tourists. Processing the symphony of urban noise with the acute hearing that made German shepherds such excellent working dogs, the family seemed to be tourists, judging by their cameras, guidebooks, and the slightly overwhelmed expressions of people experiencing London for the first time. The father was a tall man in his 40s, wearing a casual jacket and comfortable walking shoes, speaking with an accent that suggested they might be from Germany or Austria. He was explaining something to his young son, a boy of perhaps 8 or 9 years old, while pointing toward the guards and gesturing toward the palace architecture. The mother, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, was trying to manage their excited dog while also keeping track of her family's movements through the crowded area. She held the leash with experienced hands, clearly accustomed to handling a large, energetic animal. But even she seemed somewhat overwhelmed by all the new sights, sounds, smells of the busy London street that were affecting her pet. The German shepherd's tail wagged enthusiastically as it took in its surroundings, its nose working overtime to process all the different scents that filled the air. To a dog's sensitive olfactory system, the area around Buckingham Palace must have been an overwhelming mixture of human scents. Food aromas, car exhaust, the smell of other animals that had passed through the area, and countless other odors that humans couldn't even detect. Michael had encountered many unusual situations during his time as a guard. Children had tried to make him laugh by making funny faces or telling jokes. Tourists had posed for photos inches from his face, sometimes speaking directly to him as if expecting a response. Street performers had tried to include him in their acts, dancing around him or pretending to have conversations with the motionless figure. Once, a pigeon had even perched on his hat for several minutes, cooing softly and apparently finding his bearskin a comfortable resting spot, while tourists took hundreds of photos of the unexpected scene. On another occasion, a small child had escaped from his parents and tried to climb up Michael's leg, treating the guard like a statue in a playground. Through it all, he had maintained his composure, understanding that his role was not just ceremonial, but deeply symbolic. He represented centuries of tradition that stretched back through British history, through wars and peace, through changes of monarchs and shifts in politics. The red tunic he wore was the same style that had been worn by guards for generations. The discipline he displayed connected him to thousands of soldiers who had stood at this same post, facing their own challenges and demonstrating their own commitment to duty. Every tourist who saw him standing there was witnessing something that went far beyond pageantry or entertainment. They were seeing a living symbol of dedication, service, and the kind of discipline that had helped build and maintain one of the world's great constitutional monarchies. Michael understood that he was not just a big individual soldier, but a representative of something much larger and more important than himself. The German shepherd seemed particularly interested in the guards, its intelligent brown eyes fixed on Michael's, positioned with an intensity that was becoming more noticeable by the minute. The dog appeared well-trained and clearly loved, with a collar that suggested it was a cherished family pet rather than a working animal. Its coat was well-groomed, its posture confident, and its movements suggested good health and regular exercise. However, something about the bustling environment seemed to be making it increasingly agitated. Its ears, which had been casually alert when the family first approached, were now fully erect and rotating slightly to catch every sound. The dog had begun pulling slightly on its leash, its powerful shoulders straining against the restraint. Though its family appeared completely unaware of the growing tension in their pet's posture, Michael could sense that something was building, though he couldn't yet predict exactly what form it might take. His years of military experience had taught him to recognize the subtle signs that preceded unexpected events. The German Shepherd's behavior was shifting from curious interest to something more intense, and Michael found himself mentally preparing for whatever might come next, while maintaining his perfect stillness and outward composure. The German Shepherd's behavior began to change subtly at first, in ways that only someone trained to observe details would notice. What had started as curious interest was slowly transforming into something more intense and focused. The dog's breathing pattern shifted from the relaxed panting of a content animal to the more rapid, shallow breaths of one whose stress levels were rising. His stance evolved from the casual alertness of a pet exploring new surroundings to the rigid tension of an animal preparing for action. Michael, despite maintaining his absolutely rigid military position, could sense the animal's growing agitation through his carefully developed peripheral awareness and the subtle changes in the crowd's energy around him. The skills he had learned during his military training extended far beyond ceremonial drill. They included the ability to assess potential threats and unusual situations without betraying any awareness of them through body language or facial expressions. The family continued their sightseeing experience, completely absorbed in the wonder and excitement of visiting one of London's most famous landmarks. They remained utterly unaware that their beloved pet was becoming increasingly stressed by the unfamiliar environment. The father, Klaus, was now positioning himself for the perfect photograph of his son standing near the impressive guard, adjusting his expensive camera settings to capture the bright red of the uniform against the gray stone of the palace facade. Klaus was explaining to his son, Eric, about the significance of the Queen's Guard, translating the information he had read in their German guidebook into simpler terms that an 8-year-old could understand. "These soldiers, Eric, they protect the Queen. They stand here every day, rain or shine, and they must stay very still. It is a great honor to be chosen for this duty." His voice carried the pride of a father sharing an important cultural experience with his child. Meanwhile, his wife, Ingrid, had momentarily loosened her grip on Kaiser's leash to fumble with her own camera, a smaller digital model that she was trying to switch from automatic to manual mode to get better photos in the bright morning light. She wanted to capture not just the ceremony and pageantry, but also the expressions of wonder on her family's faces as they experienced this quintessentially British tradition. It was a scene that played out hundreds of times each day at the palace. Families creating precious memories, children marveling at the motionless soldiers in their spectacular uniforms, and tourists capturing moments to share with friends and family back home. The area buzzed with the excited chatter of visitors from around the world, all drawn to witness this living piece of British history and tradition. But Michael's extensive military training and experience had taught him to read situations and assess potential problems that others might completely miss. His peripheral vision, honed through countless hours of ceremonial duty, allowed him to observe the German Shepherd's changing behavior without moving his head or giving any indication that he was aware of the developing situation. The dog's body language was telling a clear story to anyone who knew how to interpret the subtle signals that animals constantly communicate. Kaiser's pupils were beginning to dilate, despite the bright morning sunlight that should have caused them to contract. His ears, which had been moving casually to track various sounds around the busy courtyard, were now pinned forward in a more aggressive stance that suggested focused attention rather than mere curiosity. Most telling of all, the muscles in Kaiser's powerful shoulders and hindquarters had begun to tense in a way that suggested the animal was unconsciously preparing for sudden movement. His weight had shifted forward onto his front paws, and his breathing had become more controlled and deliberate. These were the physical preparations that preceded action in many large dog breeds, particularly those like German Shepherds that had been bred for protective and working roles. The German Shepherd had locked his intense gaze on Michael with a focus that was becoming increasingly singular and unwavering. what had begun as the natural curiosity of an intelligent animal encountering something unusual was rapidly escalating into something more concerning. To Kaiser's canine mind, this motionless human figure represented something that didn't fit into his normal understanding of how humans behaved. Dogs are creatures of social interaction and movement. They read human emotions and intentions through body language, facial expressions, vocal tones, and the subtle energy that people project. Michael's complete stillness and lack of any readable social signals was creating a kind of cognitive dissonance in Kaiser's mind that was manifesting as increasing agitation and focus. Other tourists in the area remained completely unaware of the tension that was building just meters away from them. A group of elderly visitors from Scotland were discussing the architectural details of the palace facade, comparing it to Edinburgh Castle and debating the relative merits of different royal residences. Teenagers from various countries were taking elaborate selfies, trying to capture themselves with the colorful guards in the background. Young couples posed for romantic photos that they would later share on social media, while tour guides lead groups through their well-rehearsed explanations of royal protocol and the history of the changing of the guard ceremony. Street vendors called out their wares, postcards, miniature flags, toy soldiers, and other souvenirs that would help visitors remember their London experience. The normal sounds of London. Life continued to provide a constant background symphony. Around them, the rumble of traffic from the mall and Constitution Hill, the distant sound of construction work as the city continuously renewed itself, conversations in dozens of different languages, and the ever-present urban hum that characterizes any great metropolitan area. Big Ben's chimes echoed across the city, marking another hour in London's endless cycle of activity. Pigeons cooed and fluttered around the area, accustomed to the daily crowds, and occasionally bold enough to approach tourists in hopes of finding dropped food. The fountains in the nearby parks provided a gentle splashing sound that mixed with the urban cacophony. Michael's military training was now automatically engaging on multiple levels. Without breaking his ceremonial pose or giving any outward sign of concern, he began mentally preparing for what might come next. His experience had taught him that situations could escalate quickly and unexpectedly, and that the key to handling them successfully was preparation and mental rehearsal of various possible scenarios. Years of service had taught him that animals, unlike humans, operated purely on instinct and immediate emotional responses. They couldn't understand the ceremonial nature of his role, the historical significance of his position, or the importance of maintaining his disciplined stance. To the German Shepherd, Michael was simply a potential threat, challenge, or anomaly that needed to be addressed according to the animal's natural behavioral patterns. Michael began running through the protocols he had been taught for unusual situations. The primary rule was always to maintain his position and composure unless there was an immediate threat to public safety that required intervention. Secondary considerations included protecting the dignity of the uniform and the reputation of the guard, while also ensuring that any response was proportionate to the actual level of danger present. The dog's family was beginning to notice that something was different about Kaiser's behavior, though they still hadn't recognized the full extent of what was developing. Ingrid looked up from her camera adjustments to see that Kaiser had planted his feet firmly and was refusing to move forward. With the rest of the family as they continued their tour around the palace perimeter, she tugged gently on the leash. Assuming that her pet was simply being stubborn or had become distracted by a particularly interesting smell, perhaps the scent of other dogs that had passed through the area, or the complex mixture of urban odors that would be overwhelming, to a canine's sensitive nose. She called his name in the loving but slightly exasperated tone that dog owners around the world would recognize. Kaiser.com, Shan. Come on, don't be difficult. But Kaiser was well beyond responding to normal commands and social cues now. Something primal and instinctual had been triggered in the animal's brain, and his focus had narrowed to a single, laser-like point, the motionless figure in the red tunic standing just a few meters away. The dog's breathing became more labored and visible, his chest rising and falling more rapidly as his body prepared for whatever action his instincts were telling him to take. A low, almost inaudible growl began to emanate from deep in Kaiser's chest, Not the aggressive snarl of an angry dog, but the uncertain, questioning rumble of an animal that was trying to understand. Something that didn't make sense according to his natural understanding of the world. This sound was so quiet that only Michael, with his trained awareness, could detect it above the ambient noise of the busy tourist area. The confrontation that would test everything Michael had learned about discipline, duty, and grace under pressure was now just moments away from beginning, the space of a few heartbeats. A routine day of ceremonial duty was about to transform into a situation that would be remembered and discussed for years to come among the guards, and would demonstrate the true meaning of maintaining composure in the face of the unexpected. The moment that would test everything Michael had learned throughout his military career happened in the space of a single explosive heartbeat. Kaiser suddenly lunged forward with the raw, unstoppable power that only a large, athletic dog in peak physical condition could generate. His powerful hindquarters coiled and released like springs, propelling his 75-pound frame forward across the smooth stones of the palace courtyard with startling speed and determination. The leash, which had been loosely held by his distracted owner as she fiddled with her camera settings, slipped from Ingrid's grasp entirely. The leather strap fell to the ground with a soft thud that was immediately lost in the ambient noise of the busy tourist area. Kaiser was now free, unrestrained, and completely focused on the motionless figure that had somehow triggered every protective and territorial instinct bred into his German shepherd. Genes over generations of careful selection. The dog's powerful legs propelled him forward in great bounding strides, each one covering impressive distance as he closed the gap between himself and his target. His focus was entirely, absolutely fixed on the motionless guard who had somehow violated Kaiser's understanding of how humans should behave. To the animal's mind, this strange, statue-like figure represented something that needed to be investigated, challenged, possibly confronted. Screams erupted from the crowd as tourists suddenly realized what was happening. The peaceful, ceremonial atmosphere was instantly transformed into something charged with tension and potential danger. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer to their bodies, protective instincts kicking in as they witnessed a large, powerful animal charging toward what appeared to be an imminent confrontation. Other visitors stepped back quickly, creating an expanding circle of empty space around the developing drama. Some people pressed themselves against the palace railings or sought shelter behind nearby structures, uncertain about what they were witnessing but recognizing that they wanted to be well clear of whatever was about to happen. Cameras that had been peacefully capturing tourist memories were now frantically recording what could become a dangerous incident. The clicking of camera shutters accelerated to a rapid-fire pace, while smartphone screens lit up as people began filming what they thought might be a significant event. The change in the crowd's energy was palpable, transforming from casual, tourist interest to focused, worried attention. The dog's family stood frozen in absolute horror, watching their beloved pet racing toward what they feared could be a catastrophic confrontation. Ingrid's hands flew to her mouth, her camera forgotten, as she watched Kaiser charging across the courtyard. "Kaiser, 9. She screamed in German, her voice cracking with panic and embarrassment. The word echoed off the palace walls, but the dog was far beyond responding to vocal commands now. Klaus dropped his expensive camera entirely, letting it hang from its neck strap as he took several running steps toward the unfolding drama, though he was far too distant to intervene. His son Eric began crying, confused and frightened by his parents' sudden panic and the dramatic change in the atmosphere around them. The family's wonderful London vacation had suddenly transformed into their worst nightmare. Michael felt his heart rate spike dramatically as he saw the magnificent German Shepherd racing directly toward him with obvious intent and determination. Every natural human instinct that had kept his species alive for millions of years was now screaming at him to move, to defend himself, to step aside, to raise his arms protectively, or to prepare for impact. The primal fight-flight response that governs all animal behavior was flooding his system with adrenaline. The approaching dog was truly magnificent in its focused power and athletic ability. Kaiser was easily weighing 75 pounds of lean muscle and bone, moving with the speed and determination of an animal that had made a clear decision to act. His ears were flattened back against his head in a posture that suggested serious intent. His mouth was slightly open, revealing impressive canine teeth, and his brown eyes were locked absolutely on his target with unwavering focus and determination. Michael could see individual details becoming clearer with each of Kaiser's powerful strides. The way the dog's thick coat rippled with each movement, the determination etched in his intelligent face, the perfect coordination of his muscular legs as they carried him forward with increasing speed. There was something almost beautiful about the animal's focus and athletic grace, even as it represented a significant challenge to Michael's training and composure. But this was exactly the kind of moment that separated a true Queen's Guard from an ordinary soldier, the kind of test that revealed whether years of rigorous training had truly taken hold. The difference between ceremonial duty and real military discipline was often measured in moments exactly like this one, when natural human instincts clashed directly with professional obligations and training. Years of the most demanding military conditioning under the most challenging circumstances had prepared Michael for situations where maintaining composure wasn't just about ceremony or tradition. It was about proving that discipline and training could overcome the most fundamental human survival instincts. Every drill instructor who had ever shouted at him, every hour of standing motionless in rain and heat, every moment of physical and mental challenge had been building toward situations exactly like this one. Michael forced his breathing to remain steady and controlled, even as his heart hammered against his ribs and every muscle in his body wanted to tense for action. He focused on the breathing techniques he had learned during his most intensive training periods, using controlled respiration to maintain mental clarity and physical control despite the flood of adrenaline that was coursing through his system. He kept his muscles deliberately relaxed and loose, fighting against the natural tendency to tighten up in anticipation of impact. His hands remained in their prescribed position. His rifle stayed at its exact regulation angle, and his facial expression showed no sign of the internal struggle he was experiencing between training and instinct. The crowd's screams and shouts grew louder and more frantic as Kaiser closed the distance. Some tourists were now reaching for their phones to call for help, while others simply stood transfixed by the unfolding drama, unable to look away from what appeared to be an imminent collision between human discipline and animal instinct. A few security personnel stationed around the palace perimeter had noticed the commotion and were beginning to move toward the scene, but they were positioned too far away to intervene in time. Radio chatter crackled as guards communicated the developing situation to their supervisors. But the confrontation would play out between Michael and Kaiser long before any external assistance could arrive. Time seemed to slow down to an almost dreamlike pace as Michael's mind processed the situation with the hyper-clarity that often accompanies moments of extreme stress. He could hear his old drill sergeant's voice from years ago, echoing across the training grounds of Catterick. A guard's duty is to remain at his post regardless of distractions, regardless of challenges, regardless of what the world throws at you, whether it's rain, snow, heat, cold, or any unexpected situation. The position must be maintained. The reputation of the entire regiment, the dignity of centuries of tradition, and the honor of every soldier who had ever worn the uniform rested on each individual guard's ability to uphold these standards no matter what circumstances they faced. Michael understood that he was not just representing himself in this moment, but embodying the collective discipline and dedication of thousands of soldiers who had stood at this same post. Throughout British history, as Kaiser reached the final few meters of his charge, Michael could see the individual details of the approaching animal with startling clarity. The intensity and intelligence in the dog's brown eyes, which showed not malice but a kind of determined curiosity. The way the powerful muscles in Kaiser's chest and shoulders worked in perfect coordination as he ran. The slight foam at the corners of his mouth from the exertion of his sprint across the courtyard. The German Shepherd was not attacking out of malice, aggression, or training, but responding to instincts that had been bred and reinforced in his ancestors for countless generations. In Kaiser's mind, this strange, motionless figure represented something unprecedented that needed to be challenged. investigated, somehow resolved according to the behavioral patterns that governed his species. Michael could feel the vibrations of Kaiser's paws striking the stone courtyard, could hear the animal's controlled breathing, and could sense the focused determination that was driving the dog forward. In just seconds, years of military training and discipline would be tested against millions of years of evolutionary instinct. As human and animal approached a confrontation that would be remembered and discussed for years to come, what happened next would become the stuff of legend among the Queen's Guard. A story that would be told and retold in mess halls and barracks for generations to come, each telling adding new details while the core truth remained unchanged. Kaiser reached Michael's position with all the momentum and power of his determined charge. But instead of the aggressive confrontation that everyone expected, something absolutely remarkable and unexpected occurred. The German Shepherd came to. An abrupt, dramatic halt, just inches from the guard's perfectly polished boots. His powerful momentum carried him into a sliding stop on the smooth courtyard stones, his claws scrambling for purchase as physics demanded he come to rest somewhere. Near his intended target, the sound of his paws skidding across the ancient stones echoed briefly in the sudden silence that had fallen over the crowd, for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Dog and guard existed in a bubble of perfect stillness. Kaiser stood there, breathing heavily from his sprint, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he processed what he had found at the end of his charge. Steam rose slightly from his warm body in the cool morning air, and small puffs of vapor escaped from his mouth with each exhale. Michael's complete and absolute lack of reaction seemed to create a kind of cognitive puzzle that Kaiser had never encountered before. There was no fear to sense through the complex chemical signals that dogs read so easily, no aggression to match or respond to, no defensive posture to interpret, no movement to chase or react against. Just absolute, perfect stillness and an almost supernatural calm that radiated from every fiber of the guard's being. The crowd held its collective breath. Hundreds of people frozen in anticipation of what would happen next. Parents continued to hold their children close, ready to move quickly if the situation escalated, while photographers instinctively raised their cameras to capture whatever unfolded next. The silence was so complete that individual sounds became magnified. The distant hum of London traffic, the soft cooing of pigeons, even the subtle sound of the wind moving through the nearby trees in St. James's Park. Kaiser's head tilted slightly to one side in the universally recognizable gesture that dogs make when they encounter something they don't quite understand. His intelligent brown eyes studied Michael's face, searching for any hint of expression, emotion, or reaction that might help him categorize this strange human according to his natural behavioral framework. But Michael's face remained as impassive. As carved stone, his eyes focused on a distant point beyond the crowd, his expression giving away absolutely nothing. The dog's family stood paralyzed with a mixture of anxiety, embarrassment, and amazement. Ingrid had her hands pressed to her mouth, afraid to call out to Kaiser for fear of disrupting whatever delicate balance had been achieved. Klaus had his camera ready, but seemed afraid to take photos, uncertain whether documenting this moment would be appropriate or might somehow make the situation worse. Little Eric peeked out from behind his mother's legs, his tears forgotten in the fascination of watching his family's pet engaged in what appeared to be a staring contest with one of the famous guards. Other tourists were beginning to realize that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The initial panic was slowly being replaced by wonder and curiosity. Then, something beautiful and completely unexpected began to unfold. Kaiser's aggressive posture, which had been maintained throughout his charge, started to relax in subtle but noticeable ways. His ears, which had been pinned back in a gesture that suggested potential aggression or high stress, slowly returned to their natural, alert position. The rigid tension in his powerful shoulders and hindquarters began to ease, and his breathing gradually slowed from the rapid panting of an animal in high-stress mode to something more normal and controlled. The transformation was remarkable too. Witnessed and spoke to the intelligence that German shepherds are renowned for. Kaiser was processing the complete absence of threat signals from this motionless human and adjusting his own behavior accordingly. In the animal kingdom, aggression is typically met with aggression, fear with fear, and dominance, challenges with responses in kind. But Michael's complete neutrality was something entirely outside Kaiser's experience. The German Shepherd began to circle Michael slowly, his movement cautious and curious rather than aggressive. Each step was deliberate and controlled as he investigated this fascinating puzzle from different angles. His nose, with its incredible sensitivity to scent, began working to gather information about this mysterious figure who remained so perfectly still. Michael could feel the dog's warm breath through his heavy woolen trousers as Kaiser investigated. His boots, the hem of his red tunic, and the various scents that clung to his uniform. The animal's wet nose brushed against his hand, which remained perfectly positioned at his side despite every dog lover's instinct, telling him to reach down and pet this magnificent creature. Through his peripheral vision, Michael could observe Kaiser's investigation without moving his head even a fraction of an inch. Years of ceremonial duty had honed his ability to see a wide field of view while appearing to stare straight ahead into the distance. He could see that the dog's tail, which had been rigid and still during the charge, had begun to show the first tentative signs of movement. The change in Kaiser's demeanor was becoming more pronounced with each passing moment. What had begun as a potentially dangerous situation was evolving into something entirely different and far more beautiful. The dog seemed to be reaching the conclusion that this motionless figure posed no threat whatsoever. And more than that, represented something that deserved a different kind of response entirely. Security personnel had now reached the perimeter of the scene, but they too seemed fascinated by what was unfolding. Rather than immediately intervening, they positioned themselves strategically nearby, ready to act if needed, but recognizing that something special was happening that shouldn't be disrupted unnecessarily. Their training had taught them to assess situations carefully before taking action. What they were seeing didn't appear to require immediate intervention. The crowd's initial panic had now completely transformed into amazement and wonder. People were beginning to whisper to each other, pointing out the remarkable change in the dog's behavior and expressing admiration for the guard's incredible composure. Parents were explaining to their children that they were witnessing something very special, a demonstration of discipline and training that few people ever got to see. Kaiser completed his careful circle around Michael and then did something that brought audible gasps of delight and amazement from the watching crowd, especially from the children who had been frightened just moments before. The German Shepherd sat down directly in front of the guard, positioning himself in what appeared to be a posture of attention and respect. The dog looked up at Michael's face with what could only be described as curiosity mixed with a kind of reverence. His tongue lolled out slightly in the relaxed manner of a content dog, and his tail began a gentle, rhythmic wagging against the ancient stones of the courtyard. The sound of his tail tapping against the ground created a soft, steady beat that seemed almost musical in the relative quiet that had fallen over the area. The transformation from the aggressive, charging animal of just minutes before to this calm, respectful creature was so complete and so remarkable that even experienced animal handlers in the crowd were shaking their heads in amazement. Kaiser had not only recognized the absence of threat, but seemed to have identified something in Michael's extraordinary discipline that commanded a different kind of response entirely. The German Shepherd's intelligent eyes remained fixed on Michael's face, as if trying to understand the source of the incredible calm and strength that radiated from this motionless human. It was as though Kaiser recognized that he was in the presence of something special, something that transcended ordinary human behavior and demanded respect rather than challenge. The moment stretched on, creating a tableau that photographers would later describe as one of the most moving and beautiful scenes they had ever captured. The perfectly disciplined soldier and the magnificent animal, connected by mutual respect and the recognition that true strength often manifests not in action, but in the ability to remain perfectly still in the face of any challenge. What happened next would be talked about for years to come among the guards and become part of palace folklore. Kaiser reached Michael's position, and instead of the aggressive confrontation everyone expected, something remarkable occurred. The German Shepherd came to an abrupt halt, just inches from the guard's polished boots, his powerful momentum carrying him into a sliding stop on the smooth courtyard stones. The dog stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, staring up at the motionless figure towering above him. Michael's complete lack of reaction seemed to confuse the animal. There was no fear to sense, no aggression to match, no movement to chase, just absolute stillness and calm. Kaiser's head tilted slightly to one side, the way dogs do when they encounter something they don't quite understand. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Parents continued to hold their children close, while photographers instinctively raised their cameras to capture whatever unfolded. The dog's family stood paralyzed with anxiety, afraid that any sound or movement from them might trigger the confrontation they desperately wanted to avoid. Then, something beautiful and unexpected began to happen. Kaiser's aggressive posture started to relax. His ears, which had been pinned back in attack mode, slowly returned to their natural position. His breathing began to slow, and the tension in his powerful shoulders visibly decreased. The German Shepherd began to circle Michael slowly, sniffing curiously at his boots and the hem of his red tunic. Michael could feel the dog's warm breath through his trousers as Kaiser investigated this strange, statue-like human. The animal's wet nose brushed against his hand, which remained perfectly positioned at his side despite every instinct telling him to pet the beautiful creature. Through his peripheral vision, Mikhail could see that the dog's tail had begun to wag slightly, not the aggressive, stiff wag of a challenged animal, but the curious, cautious wag of a dog trying to figure out a puzzle. It was remarkable to witness. What had begun as a potentially dangerous situation was evolving into something entirely different. Kaiser seemed to be reaching the conclusion that this motionless figure posed no threat at all. In fact, the complete absence of any reaction appeared to be calming the animal in a way that shouting or movement never could have achieved. Security personnel had now arrived at the scene, but they too seemed fascinated by what was unfolding. Rather than immediately intervening, they positioned themselves nearby, ready to act if needed but recognizing that something special was happening. The crowd's panic had transformed into amazement as people realized they were witnessing an extraordinary display of discipline and an unexpected moment of connection between human and animal. Kaiser completed his circle around Michael and then did something that brought gasps of delight from the watching children. The German Shepherd sat down directly in front of the guard, looking up at him with what could only be described as respect and curiosity. His tongue lolled out slightly, and his tail continued its gentle wagging against the stones of the courtyard. The standoff continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. Kaiser remained seated in front of Michael, occasionally tilting his head as if waiting for some acknowledgement or response that never came. The German Shepherd seemed genuinely puzzled by this human who showed no fear, offered no aggression, and displayed no reaction whatsoever to his presence. During this time, the crowd's mood had completely shifted. What had begun as a frightening incident had transformed into something magical that people were now trying to capture on their phones and cameras. Children whispered excitedly to their parents, asking why the dog was just sitting there and why the guard wouldn't pet him. Adults found themselves admiring both the discipline of the soldier and the intelligence of the animal, but had somehow recognized there was no threat to respond to. Kaiser's family finally began to approach cautiously, the mother holding a replacement leash and speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "Kaiser, come here, boy. Come on, leave the nice guard alone." But the dog seemed reluctant to move from his position. He had found something fascinating in this encounter, and his natural curiosity was keeping him engaged with the motionless figure in red dot. Michael could hear the family's embarrassed apologies to the security personnel and the crowd in general. They were clearly mortified by their pet's behavior and worried about potential consequences. The father was explaining that Kaiser was normally very well behaved and had never done anything like this before, while the mother was frantically searching through her bag for treats that might entice the dog away from his new fixation. But something remarkable was happening that the family, most of the crowd, couldn't fully understand. Kaiser wasn't being stubborn or disobedient in the traditional sense. The German Shepherd had encountered something completely outside His experience, a human being who remained perfectly calm and unmoved regardless of what happened around him. To a dog's mind, this was both puzzling and somehow admirable. The animal's intelligence was evident in how he continued to study Michael, occasionally standing up to sniff at different parts of his uniform before returning to his seated position. Kaiser's behavior had become almost reverent, as if he recognized that he was in the presence of something special. Even if he couldn't understand exactly what it was, Michael, for his part, was fighting his own internal battle. Every dog lover's instinct wanted him to acknowledge this beautiful animal, to offer some small gesture of recognition or kindness. The German Shepherd was clearly intelligent and gentle, despite his intimidating size and initial aggressive approach. Michael could feel the dog's warm presence near his legs and sensed the animal's genuine curiosity and lack of malicious intent. As the minutes passed, other guards at nearby posts were becoming aware of the situation through their peripheral vision. They maintained their own positions with perfect discipline, but Michael knew that his handling of this incident would be discussed and evaluated later. How he managed this unexpected challenge would reflect not just on him personally, but on the entire tradition and reputation of the Queen's Guard. The resolution of this extraordinary encounter came as gradually and peacefully as the entire situation had evolved, demonstrating that sometimes the most profound moments in life unfold not through dramatic action, but through the quiet power of patience, respect, and mutual understanding. After what felt like a lifetime to everyone involved, Kaiser's family finally managed to coax him away from his vigil. But not before the magnificent German Shepherd performed one final act that would be remembered and discussed by everyone present. For years to come, the moment that brought the standoff to its conclusion was as beautiful and touching as anything that had preceded it. Kaiser, as if sensing that his time with this remarkable human was drawing to a close, stood up slowly from his seated position. His movements were deliberate and dignified, showing none of the impulsive energy that had characterized his earlier charge across the courtyard. Then, in a gesture that brought audible gasps of amazement and wonder from the watching crowd, Kaiser rose up on his powerful hind legs and placed his front paws gently and carefully against Michael's legs. The contact was soft and respectful, more like a greeting between old friends than any kind of aggressive or demanding behavior. The dog looked up into Michael's face with his intelligent brown eyes, as if making one final attempt to connect with this extraordinary human who had shown him something completely outside his previous experience. For a brief, perfect moment, human and animal were connected in absolute stillness and mutual respect. Michael, maintaining his discipline with superhuman effort, continued to stare straight ahead, while feeling the gentle weight of Kaiser's paws against his legs and the warm breath of the animal so close to his face. It was a connection that transcended words, commands, or normal social interaction, a recognition between two beings of each other's remarkable qualities. The crowd watched in complete, reverent silence, recognizing instinctively that they were witnessing something truly special and unprecedented. The only sounds were the distant hum of London traffic, the soft cooing of pigeons, and the gentle clicking of cameras as photographers captured this once-in-a-lifetime moment. Even the children in the crowd seemed to understand that this was a time for quiet observation rather than excited chatter. Then Kaiser dropped back down to all fours with the same dignified control he had shown throughout the latter part of their encounter. He turned slowly, almost reluctantly, and walked calmly back to his relieved and amazed family. His tail wagged in what appeared to be satisfaction and contentment rather than disappointment or frustration. It was as if the dog had achieved exactly what he had set out to do, though no human observer could say exactly what that might have been. The aftermath of the incident proved to be as remarkable and significant as the event itself. Instead of criticism, disciplinary action, or concern about protocol violations, Michael found himself receiving praise and commendation from his superiors and fellow guards that went far beyond anything he had experienced in his military career. His ability to maintain perfect composure and discipline during such an unusual, challenging, and potentially dangerous situation was seen as exemplary and worthy of recognition. Colonel James Hartwell, the commanding officer of the regiment, personally commended Michael for his handling of the situation. "Sergeant Thompson," he said during their private meeting, "you demonstrated exactly the kind of discipline, judgment, and grace under pressure that exemplifies the very best traditions of the Queen's Guard. Your ability to remain calm and composed, while a potentially dangerous situation developed around you, and then to maintain that composure as it evolved into something unprecedented, shows the highest level of professional military bearing." The incident quickly became a story that was shared throughout not just the regiment, but the entire British military establishment. It was used in training sessions as an example of how proper discipline and mental preparation could enable a soldier to handle completely unexpected situations with grace and professionalism. Military instructors would reference the Kaiser incident when teaching young soldiers about the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. Visitors to the palace that day left with far more than they had bargained for when they planned their London sightseeing trip. Instead of just photographs of colorful uniforms and ceremonial traditions, they had witnessed a real-life demonstration of what those traditions actually represented, not just pageantry or tourist entertainment, but genuine discipline, dedication, and the kind of character that had helped build and maintain one of the world's great constitutional monarchies. Social media posts about the incident spread rapidly across the internet, people sharing videos, photographs, and personal accounts of what they had witnessed. The story was picked up by news organizations around the world, with headlines like "When Discipline Met Instinct," "A Royal Guard's Remarkable Encounter," and "The Dog Who Learned to Respect an Extraordinary Moment." At Buckingham Palace, comments on these posts revealed how deeply the incident had affected people who witnessed it or saw the footage. Many viewers expressed admiration for both Michael's incredible discipline and Kaiser's intelligence in recognizing and responding to something special in the Guard's behavior. Dog lovers around the world praised Kaiser's eventual respect and gentleness, while military veterans and active service members highlighted Michael's exemplary demonstration of what true military bearing really meant. Kaiser's family had initially been mortified by their pet's behavior and worried about potential legal or disciplinary consequences, later sent a formal letter of apology to Buckingham Palace, along with a substantial donation to a military charity that supported veterans and active service members. In their letter, they explained that Kaiser had never behaved in such a way before, and expressed their profound admiration for the Guard's professional handling of what could have been a very different kind of situation. More interesting still, the family reported that Kaiser seemed somehow changed by the encounter. In the days and weeks that followed, the normally energetic and occasionally impulsive dog displayed a new level of calm and focused attention that surprised everyone who knew him. It was as if he had learned something important during those minutes of stillness with Michael, perhaps about the nature of true strength, or the power that comes from perfect self-control. Michael continued his distinguished service with the Queen's Guard, but the incident with Kaiser became a defining moment in his military career and personal development. It demonstrated that the skills and discipline required for ceremonial duties could be just as challenging, demanding, and important as those needed in combat situations. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly when faced with the completely unexpected, and to represent something larger and more important than oneself, these were the qualities that truly mattered in military. Years later, when Michael had been promoted to senior positions and was training younger guards just beginning their service, he would often tell the story of his encounter with Kaiser. But he never presented it as a story about victory or defeat, about who came out on top in a confrontation between human and animal. Instead, he would emphasize that the real triumph that day was about how discipline, training, and genuine respect for duty could transform a potentially dangerous and embarrassing lynching situation into a moment of beauty, understanding, and mutual respect. Kaiser charged forward with natural instinct, Michael would tell new recruits, following the behavioral patterns that millions of years of evolution had bred into him, but he walked away having encountered something that transcended ordinary human behavior, a demonstration of commitment to service and duty that even an animal could recognize and respect. The question that had been posed in the minds of everyone who witnessed the incident, who came out on top in this remarkable encounter, was answered not through dominance, its victory, or the assertion of power over another being. Instead, it was resolved through the demonstration that sometimes the most powerful response to a challenge is no response at all, and that true strength often manifests not in action, but in the ability to remain perfectly still and composed regardless of what the world might throw at you in the end. Both human and animal had demonstrated their finest qualities, Michael through his unwavering discipline and dedication to duty, and Kaiser through his intelligence, sensitivity, and ultimate respect for something he recognized as worthy of admiration. The real victory was that a moment which could have ended in conflict, injury, or embarrassment instead became a testament to the possibility of mutual understanding and respect between very different kinds of beings, each remarkable in their own way.